Yo, this is Noah Henson of Pillar, and you're listening to Solid Rock Radio. Yay!
Backstage with Mothership on Solid Rock Radio begins now. Hear the best in new music, artist interviews, stories from the road, and more. You are now backstage, and here's your host, Mothership.
Hey everybody, this week's Backstage with Mothership is going to be a little different. I had no idea when I started this call with Noah Henson we would end up talking for 2 hours about life, music, friends, and Pillar. It was difficult to narrow down such a rich conversation to my regular format, so I have 4 segments this week instead of 3. Less music, but all Pillar. You will not want to miss a minute of this, especially the exciting, exclusive announcement Noah is going to make in the last segment. I have Noah Henson from Pillar and Brantley Gilbert here. How you doing?
I'm good, Cindy. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. We've only met twice, and I'm sure you won't remember the first one. It was a meet and greet. Rock the Flags and Six Flags Over Georgia back in like 2012 when you were playing with Pillar that night.
That's crazy.
Second time, you remember?
Was it that city church here in Tennessee?
Yeah,
in
Spring Hill. Yeah,
Yep.
You were with Ryan McMahon, and you came to a City Rock Fest tour in Spring Hill.
Yes, ma'am. I do
and
remember
we
that.
bumped into each other and talked for a second. So, okay, that's the only talking we've done. So we haven't had time to sit down in this format and actually talk about things.
But I feel like I know you because vicariously through everybody, all my buddies that I've toured with. You're like the most popular lady in Christian rock. You know what I'm saying?
I'll send you a check later, bud.
All right.
Thank you. That's sweet. I wanted to get you on here because, of course, everybody loves Pillar, and we hadn't heard from Pillar in a while unless it's a little Christmas song or something pops up. So I wanted to go back into the beginning. You were not there in 98 when it started. I think it was just Michael and Rob.
And then there was Travis and Brad. That was it was a 4-piece, yeah. And they actually had a DJ back then, too. I don't know if he was technically in the band, but he would tour with them. DJ Double K. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, cool. I don't remember that.
Yeah.
But you came in 2001.
Yes, ma'am.
So how did that call come?
I was playing in a band where I grew up in North Carolina. There's a band called Signet, and we were playing a venue called Cafe Jam out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Had kind of become like the hometown band there, along with some other guys. I don't know if you remember a band called The Syndicate or something like that. They used to be called the 7 Method.
I don't think I knew them.
Okay. Well, we were playing with them that same show. I guess we'd gotten a call a month earlier that this new band, Pillar, that everybody was like, oh, dude, you got to check out this new band, Pillar, on Flickr Records. And they were coming through town, so they asked us to open up the place there did. So we did the show. We were yanking gear off the stage. And Kalel, or Michael Wittig, bass player for Pillar, walks up to me and he's like, dude, are you guys signed? And I was like, nah, man, we're just locals. He's like, we've never had an opening band as good as you guys. That was insane. We don't want to follow you guys right now, which was a nice little pat on the back. But in reality, they were, much further ahead than we were as far as like being signed and kind of touring and all that. But at the time, my band were in talks with some, big producers and some other things like that. We were talking to Slipknot's producer and we were going to do the crossover thing. Well, after the show, we were all just hanging out and we just all hit it off. It was a great time. Fast forward about 2 weeks or so, I get home from a long day on the job site. I was building houses back then. I walk in the door and my bass player is like, hey, man, you got this call from some guy with Pillar. And he's looking at me like, that's weird. Why would he call you, man? Because we had a manager at the time and he was like, why wouldn't they call him? Called a guy named Danny Hill. He answers the phone and he's like, hey, man. I said, this is Noah Henson. I was calling for Danny Hill. And he goes, oh, yeah, dude, give me a second. Then I hear him on the other line. He's like, hey, man, I got to let you go. I got a really important call on his cell phone. And I was like, whoa, what could be so important about this call, And he's like, hey, man, so how you doing? We just chatted up for a second. And he said, so I got a proposition for you. And I was like, uh-oh, And he's like, so the guys have been talking a lot and they are looking for a guitar player. Their guitar player actually on the way down to the show in North Carolina had brought up that he was going to be leaving the band. And I was like, that's crazy. And he goes, we're not trying to steal you from anybody, but he said, we keep trying different guys out and talking to other guys and nobody seems to be the right fit, but everybody just keeps talking about you. And I was like, man, wow, I'm so honored. Wow. I didn't even know how to take this conversation. I barely ever left North Carolina for anything,
How old were you then?
I was 19. He said, so just to put it bluntly, we're interested in you being our guitar player. He said, we don't need to try you out because we've already seen you play and we know, what you do. And I was like, well, man, that's crazy, dude. There's a lot going on with my band. And I said, can I pray about it? He was like, bro, absolutely. He said, I was hoping you'd say that. So for the next 4 or 5 days, I prayed every day. I was constantly in prayer. It would have been such a massive change because I asked him as I was getting off the phone too. I was like, will I be able to stay in North Carolina? And he was like, he said, it'll be hard. We'll need you to probably move to Oklahoma where we're at. And I was like, Oklahoma? I love Oklahoma now that I've lived there for 10 years. So I pray about it. And a good friend of mine said to me one night, if I were you, I would just sit down with your band, have a meeting. Well, why would I do that? I mean, they already know about the situation. And they were like, yeah, but are you sure that they're all in this as much as you are? Cindy, what I had come to the conclusion of was that if my band that I was in were all as committed as I was, that I wasn't going to leave the band. So I took a meeting with the guys and we're sitting there. I just said, all right, guys, well, y'all know what's up. I just wanted to call a meeting so that we could talk about this, man, because I'm pretty sure you guys are all on the same page and I'm not going to leave this band if you guys can tell me that y'all are all in this for the long haul. Mm-hmm. And I handed it over to our drummer and he said, well, I'm glad you said that because I'm quitting. And I was like, what? He was my best friend, and it's like, that's everybody's dream is to be in a band with your best friends,
Right.
He quit. He's like, hey man, I'm going to seminary. I just can't give it the time it needs. And I was like, okay. So that's 1/4 of the band. I look over at our singer and he's like, man, he said, me and my girl have been dating for a while. And he said, we're getting pretty serious. I just don't know if the road is. I'm like, are you kidding me right now? We're about to blow like $40,000 on a record. You know what I'm saying? Like,
wow. And
then, of course, our bass player, John, goes, man, just stay. We'll start our own band. The hand of God, moved. And he made it obvious to me at that point that because the guys had made an offer to me, the Pillar guys had said, hey, we'll fly you up here. And if you want it, we'll just put it in your hands, man. We'll just let you come up here and hang out with us for a week. We'll go on tour and you can hang out. And so we did. I remember flying in and I went on tour with them for a week. And of course I fell in love with it. So yeah, I wasn't even officially in the band yet. So we actually set up in this room and started jamming, and it was like just chemistry immediately. Like, in fact, the first song that we ever jammed, they were like, what kind of riffs you got, man? And I pulled out this anyhow, that was a song called Just to Get By off the Fireproof album. So first thing we ever jammed was turned into a song immediately, and then it just got better from there. So it was one of those, like, I couldn't argue with the fact that the chemistry was right on and God had really done some things. So it was the day after my birthday that I flew there officially to join the band.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. Like, happy birthday for the rest of your life. Yeah. This is it, man. I was a child when I joined this band, Cindy.
Yes, you were.
And the guys, they were all about 5 or 6 years older than me. And I mean, that's like dog years to human years, They were like, oh my gosh, man, this dude's late everywhere. He's dragging his feet, sleeping in all the time, It was the life.
You were a baby.
I was a baby. We worked really hard, though. That was the thing. And I remember, learning that, talent goes a long way, but work ethic goes even further. Just in anything in life, but definitely in the music industry. Yeah. When I joined the band, Travis Jenkins was still in the band for a few weeks so that we could kind of transition out, and it kind of sucked because the stuff that me and Travis were jamming before he left the band was insane. I was like, dude, are you sure you got to leave now? And, we all talked about the possibility of just having the 2 guitar players, But it was kind of the thing back then to just be like a 4-piece and have the big old fat guitar, And so, yeah, man, I mean, it worked out. It was about a year after I joined Pillar. Brad, the drummer, he was just on his way out. He's like, guys, the road's not really for me anymore. I just want to get a job and do that thing and raise a family. It was GMA week here in Nashville. And we were at a little place up the street right down the road from Wild Horse. And we're standing up there watching this 3-piece band from Kansas City. And Lester Estelle was playing drums for them. I mean, literally the first note in the song, me and him looked at each other like, what? And he just after 30 seconds, he just looks at me and he goes, that's your drummer. That's the guy.
Wow.
I was like, wouldn't that be crazy? You know, and then of course, fast forward a month or two and there he was, you know.
How'd you manage that?
I don't know, man. That was a God thing. I remember when we had him come try out. I mean, it's kind of like, do we really need to try him out? I mean, do we have to? We know he's great, you know. Actually, when I moved to Oklahoma, my best friend, he was like one of the Pillar guys' really good buddies. He'd kind of helped them in the early days, but his name was Ace Eversole. God rest his soul. But he had this studio, you know, it was at his house, and that's where I'd go. Every time I had a riff idea, I'd go over to his house and we'd throw it down. I mean, literally probably like the first 3 Pillar albums that I did were all demoed out at his studio, you know. But I remember Lester coming in and setting up in that studio. I remember Rob like standing there with his arms crossed, you know, watching Lester play going, I just don't know, man. I think he's too good. I was like, are you crazy, man? This is what we need. But at the end of the day, he knew, because the reality was what it would mean to have a guy like Lester in the band is that we would all have to step up our game, you know?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, naturally he was going to tighten us up anyway, you know, because I mean, that dude doesn't play off time. I don't think he knows how to, you know?
Check us out on Facebook at I'm with Mothership. Out Performance Shop is a proud supporter of Solid Rock Radio. They specialize in retail and wholesale of automotive, high-performance, racing, and off-road products. They also carry a variety of accessories from remote control cars to rock and roller multi-carts. On the web at outperformance.com.
All right. The Pillar years on the road. What was all that like?
The good, the bad, the ugly, or just the good?
Oh, good, bad, and ugly. We got to hear it all.
Oh, man. The first tour I ever did with Pillar was the Alien Youth Tour with Skillet.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool because I had actually gone and seen Skillet play, I think a couple times when I was like a teenager, you know. But yeah, back to being on the road, off the top of my head, 2 things come to mind because it changed my whole life. Was Lindsay, my now wife. I actually met her at an IHOP in an IHOP like Pancake House, not International House of Prayer. Like, yeah, her and some of her friends come walking in, and me and our merch guy were sitting there. We had the whole place to ourselves, and in came my wife and some of her friends, and we were like, Lord? So the most memorable thing was the first show that my wife had ever come to. We were still dating. We'd only been together, I don't know, 6 months or so. And she came to watch us play. It was in, I believe, Enid, Oklahoma. We were on tour with Audio Adrenaline, and I think Super Chick was on the tour and a couple other bands. But we were 3 songs into the set when I jumped off a speaker stack and tore my ACL and my meniscus.
Ow.
Yeah. And, you know, they say that you can hear the sound.
The snap.
Snap. I didn't hear it because I landed right in front of my amps, which were way too freaking loud.
So you were denied the pleasure of hearing your ACL snap.
That's right. But I'll tell you this, I mean, I have never seen the side of my foot at that angle.
Oh,
I saw it that night. My leg completely went sideways, and my knee was on the floor. So, you know, that makes sense.
No.
Yeah. So needless to say, I was laying there in shock. And then Lester, he's literally finishing the song. It was at the end of Sunday Bloody Sunday. And because me and Rob would both jump off these big stacks at the end of that song, you know, on the downbeat. I mean, we had to cut our set short, you know, by like 13 songs. It was not great, man. But I remember Lester going, "What are you doing, man?" And I was like, "I broke my leg." You know, he's like, "What?" I was like, "I broke my leg." And then he's like, "Hey, Rob, no one broke his leg." Middle of the set, you know. But my wife, girlfriend at the time, God bless her heart, she was like, "Oh no," you know, and ran and got this guy who came and swooped me off the stage, and of course they drove me over to the hospital to check it out.
Now that was a pretty dramatic stunt to win your wife.
You know, sometimes you just got to do some extreme things, you know, if you want extreme results.
Extreme dating.
Extreme dating, man. You willing to break a bone for this girl? Well, let me tell you. Number 2, the second most memorable thing, at least it's most memorable because it's very special to me. There are times where people will come up to you, tell their stories, and tell you how you changed their lives, how God used your music to change their lives and things like that. That stuff never gets old, you know, because it's the thing that truly keeps you going. Got to have some sort of mission. And I remember this kid coming up to me, and he had tears in his eyes. And I was like, oh no, this is already emotional, you know. And he's like, "Hey man, can I talk to you for a minute?" I said, "Yeah." So he took me over to the side, and he said, "I wanted to tell you a story. When I was 17, history with my father, my family. He said my dad used to beat me every single day of my life. He said my mother passed away when I was young. And he said I got to a place in my life where he said, you know, you're 17, you don't really know what you want, what you think you know what's best for you or whatever. He said, but I just got to a place where I was done living. He said I called it the end. So one night when my dad was at work, he said I knew the code to a safe, and I went and got a firearm out of it that I intend to use on myself. Well, you know, when you're in that dark place, he said, you know, sometimes you just have to like spend some time getting into an even darker place so that you can follow through with your plan, you know. And I was like, wow, bro, this is heavy. He said, I was in my room and I was super stoned, drunk. I was everything. And he said, I had reached that moment where it was time. And he said, I leaned over, and because I was so drunk and stoned, he said, I kind of slipped. He said, my elbow hit the remote control on my stereo. He said there was a song that came on called Let It Out. It was like, let it out. Can you hear me? Can you hear my cry? And he said it literally came on that part of the song. Like within seconds, he dropped to the floor, dropped to his knees, and was in tears. You know, sometimes the raw stuff can get pretty raw, but he had a hat on his head, and he took it off. And he said, this is the hat that I had on that night when I almost blew my brains out. He said, and I want you to have it. And I was like,
oh, wow.
You know, we were crying, you know, and I was just like, bro, you know, you hear stories like this, but when somebody truly comes up to you and is like, I need you to hear this, because I need you to understand that what you're doing, it is where you need to be, is blessed. It's where God has you, because he's using you to help people like me. I took that hat and I hung it on the wall by my bed so that every morning when I woke up and turned over, I would see that hat.
Wow, that's powerful.
It's crazy, man.
Tell me how Pillar does their songwriting.
You know, the 90s were a time where everything was all about the raw sound, the raw vibe, the raw feel and emotion of the songs. And that kind of, I would say, rolled over into the early 2000s as well. So when I joined Pillar, it was naturally just hey, this is what we do. You know, like you come up with riffs, you know, we'll start throwing down drums and bass and then vocal parts, or we'll have a vocal hook and then we can write riffs to it or whatever. In rock, it's riffs and vocals, you know, and drums, and everything is madness. It was always, at least up until the Confessions album, it was always us throwing down in a room and just making these songs, you know, just shaping them. And sometimes it would even happen in the studio. Sometimes we go to the studio with, we usually have like 1,000 ideas, but we'd get it down to a certain amount. If we had less than a record, we'd write some stuff there at the studio, you know. Just because, you know, different environments can bring out different things in you. So for the most part, it usually started with a riff, and sometimes it started with a drum beat. I remember Lester was doing this beat. He was going, you know, me and him would do these syncopated things, and he did that, and I was like, that became Bring Me Down. So for the most part, it would usually start out with riffs or riff ideas, you know. And sometimes Rob would be like, I got this huge vocal hook, man. So the song Frontline, we were on tour, I believe, Disciple and Spoken and Pillar. We were playing this venue somewhere in Tennessee. I was in there and I was jamming this riff on the stage, and it was the riff for Frontline. I was working it out. I was like, I was in there jamming this riff, and historically speaking, Cindy, everybody would always have left the room, and I was still on stage making noise. I love noodling, you know. So, and honestly, that was where some of my best material that I've ever written, at least back then when I was young, would happen on the stage, you know, after everybody had left. And I was working this riff out, and I see the door fly open at the end of the room. And it was the door from the catering room. Jeff Cunningham, the original guitar player for Spoken. And he had a sandwich in his hand, and he was chewing on a bite. And he's like, now that is a hit.
Wow.
And he turns around and walks back out of the room. And we were actually talking about that. I ran into him, I don't know, it was like a year or so, 2 years ago, and we were talking about that. I was like, dude, you were right.
He knew. So iconic. Only need a couple notes and you know what it is.
Oh, man. I'm humble.
One of those. That's awesome. When Pillar began to wind down, how did y'all know that it was time to move on?
So 07 or 08, when Mike or Kalel, he had been showing some interest in some other music and stuff, but had started another band. And it just kind of worked in a way where eventually he was putting a lot of time into that. So him and, Rob just talked about it, and he left the band. And at the same time, Lester was like, well, guys, I too have been thinking about leaving because, I want to move to Nashville and I want to be a session guy. And rightfully so, because even before he was with Pillar, even as a teenager, he was a session guy in Kansas City. He did, lots and lots of sessions, which is how we met him, playing a session for somebody. So that had taken place, and then we got a new bass player, Rich Gilliland and Taylor Carroll. So we hired those guys. Boy, did we go through some drummers trying to find the right guy when we were, trying drummers out, because good gosh, I mean, that would be like, who are they going to replace Peyton Manning with, like when he leaves the team, So that happened, and long story short, we had gone in the studio with a different producer because Travis Wyrick had classically been our producer for all of our albums. And then we went with Rob Graves on the album called Confessions, which is also an album where we started to open up our writing process a little bit and have Jason Rao came in and wrote with us. Rob Graves wrote with us. Skip Mills, a bunch of different guys that were writing on that album, which was different for us, and I'd never really taken on the mentality of sharing our writing with outside sources, and it was just kind of the new way. It was like, well, this is what a lot of people are doing, and if we want to get these hits, then we, kind of got to do this. So we did that, and it was about a year after we dropped that record, before Christmas of 2009, Rob, our singer, his wife was robbed at gunpoint in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. She was coming out of Walmart and had called Rob to figure out, like, hey, I'm on my way home, blah, blah, blah. A car had pulled up in the parking lot, and this dude essentially ran up to her and threatened her with a gun and said, get in the car, and like literally pushed her into the car. And he was panicking because what had happened was him and two other guys had just robbed a bank down the street.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. The guy was panicking and he couldn't get the car and drive. She jumps out of the car. And if I remember correctly, I believe he took a shot at her as she was running away, and he just hauled out of the parking lot. And Rob was on the phone with her when this happened.
Oh, my goodness.
So he heard the phone fall. He heard all of this happen. He's like, oh, my gosh, jumps in his truck, flying down the road, pulls into the parking lot, not knowing if she's there or what. Well, luckily, there was this large group of people huddled around her. So the guy had run off with their car. And I think it was 2 weeks later that police department had found their car. Men like that are dangerous, and you could only imagine the worst, really. So the hand of God moved drastically in that situation. We had tour booked. It was us and Red, and I believe The Wedding was out, and I can't remember a couple other bands. But about halfway through that tour, Rob felt like he heard the voice of God say that he needed to be home with his family. He said, I'm going to go home for a while, which was completely understandable and equally devastating at the same time. Because this is all we knew. I'd been doing this since 2001. It was 2010, so we're talking 9 years. And so it was a drastic change. Luckily, I had been producing records in my off time, started that in 2008. So I was able to naturally just start producing and all that. But, so it was an indefinite, him taking some time off the road to be with his family. And then within like weeks, his church offered him like a full-time worship leader position while he was home with his family. And that one thing led to another. Now he's the pastor of LifeChurch.tv in Owasso, Oklahoma. So
that's amazing.
And it's amazing. It's been amazing to watch what God has done in he and his family's lives,
Backstage with Mothership returns after this.
Miller Express LLC is a Solid Rock Radio business ministry partner specializing in delivery, setup, and relocation of storage buildings. More info by calling 803-300-7594.
You're listening to Backstage with Mothership on Solid Rock Radio.
Tell us about your studio. Dread Rock Music?
Dread Rock Music. Yes, ma'am.
There you go. All right.
I had been, making demos for Pillar for years and messing around with recording and stuff for years at that point. But I had never really thought, hey, I want to go into producing full time or even go at it hard. I'd always had a love for studio stuff, my dad's brother, Uncle Mike, had a studio when I was growing up. And I think I'd been playing guitar for like 3 or 4 months when he was like, hey, bud, come into the studio and let's record some stuff, And I was like, whoa, man, So went into the studio and cut my teeth in there and, just immediately came away with an infinite love for studio. Just because I love how everything comes together. I love watching a band perform in a studio and for that magic to happen and to be able to capture something for the rest of eternity. That it was magic in a moment that only happens when that group of musicians were together. And there's just something special about that, Of course, the process has changed drastically since the old days when people were tracking, full bands in studios and these, multi-million-dollar studios with millions and millions of dollars of gear and all the right stuff, And back then they were like splicing tape. They had guys that were just editing guys that would sit in a room, slicing tape open and slipping in like little snare hits and stuff to make it sound huge. It was crazy,
How far we've come.
Yes, indeed. You can jump on a laptop and make a platinum record, In 2008, I started producing. There's a band we were playing with down in Texas, a band called 1 Minute Halo, some really good friends of mine. And they were like, bro, we know you don't really produce, but would you like to? And I was like, what? And they were like, we'd love for you to produce our album. I was like, well, man, I haven't really produced much. And they were like, well, we'd love to have you do it anyway. And I was like, well, dude, let's do it. I was so green back then, man. I look back at some of the moves I made. And I'm like, oh my gosh, man, I was such an idiot, But, that was my first record in 2008. It was actually end of 2007, early 2008, when we started tracking that record. And that was it. That was it. As soon as I did that, I was like, I will at least do this part-time for the rest of my life while Pillar's touring. And then, well, fast forward 2 years and we weren't touring anymore. So at that point, I was like, well, I got to start doing this for real. Either that or get a job at Home Depot or something, So I started inquiring with some of my industry friends here in Nashville and all over. And I got connected with there's a band called Sargent Avenue out of Michigan. I started working on that project, came here and recorded it with Rob Venable, who was Lester's studio partner at the time. And then, just from there, started doing more and more and more, produced a band called Fades Away up in Minnesota. Now, what initially happened was I was gone so long when I was working with these bands, I started to get depressed, Cindy. Really started to affect my mental health. Which then affected my marriage. It affected my relationship with my wife, my children. Because I was gone so long, I just started feeling alone. I was like, at the end of the day, the band, they'd be going home to be with their families and their friends and stuff. And I was just, I'd be alone. So I was like, you know what? I'm tired of having to leave my family to go do this. I mean, and it wasn't like I couldn't build a studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But the thing was, with the type of situations and scenarios and bands that I was working with, it was just because, with the Pillar name and all that, I was naturally going to be getting inquiries from all across the country. When I realized this, it was actually after I was working with Fades Away in Minnesota. And then I went back to Michigan to work with Sargent Avenue again. And I came home from that, and there was a band in Tulsa talking to me about producing. And they were like, well, what are your prices like? And I told them my prices, and they were like, what? Man, we can go down the street to blah, 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 do this to this guy's house, and do a whole record for blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, first off, go ahead. I was like, second off, I mean, you get what you pay for, bro. Right. You got a guy who's going to hit the record button and then get you what you played, or you got a guy who's going to help you, coach you, and actually bring out the best in you and spend quality time on it. And what I just realized in that moment was that people in Tulsa weren't going to take it that seriously. I needed to go to a place, and nothing against Tulsa. Tulsa has literally some of the most talented musicians I have ever met in my life. Towns have a way of holding people,
Mm-hmm.
After I kind of started to come out of the dark depression that I was in, I started talking to my wife, and I was like, how would you feel about moving to Nashville? And she was like, well, we've talked about it before. I wasn't really down before, but I think I'm down now. And I was like, awesome. So we sold everything we had except for my guitars, of course. Well, I sold a couple of old guitars I had from way back in the day. So long story short, we moved to Nashville, and I just thought to myself, I said, this will be a lot easier probably because, all my peers are in Nashville, our old record label, our management, our booking agent, everybody, it was like, because Nashville is like a second home to most of the Christian bands out there, because a lot of the Christian industry is here in this town. So I thought this will probably be a piece of cake. Then we moved here. Oh my gosh, Cindy.
The competition.
Oh, it's insane. It's insane. I mean, and in some ways, it's not even competition. Some of these guys are so good. When I first moved here, I was like, oh my gosh, man, what have I done? You know, but as I've found out in my life that if you don't keep at it, you'll never reach that goal. What I found is that in places like Nashville, LA, Chicago, New York City, music industry wise, I'm not even going to say the people that stick to it. I'm going to say the people that struggle through it are the ones that make it. Because it is an absolute struggle. I mean, I can't tell you how many guitars I had put up for sale just to pay the bills. Gear I didn't want to sell. It's been crazy. And when I first moved to Nashville, they called this town a 7-year town. Well, now it's a 10-year town. They've recently updated that. And you know what's crazy? I've been here about 11 years, and things really started happening about a year ago.
There you go.
But, I had some awesome things happen. And, that's the other crazy part is, like, for instance, like, back in 2014, I'd come home from the road. My wife, Lindsay, found this kid online. And next thing you know, I've got him in the studio. It was Kane Brown. We got down, started writing. And then I ended up producing an EP on him, which did some amazing things. We had a #1 record on iTunes, and he was indie. He didn't have a label or anything. So it was some pretty amazing stuff. And that really jump-started dread rock music. Most producers, they'll tell you, all it takes is one artist to initiate everything.
So your studio is in your home?
Yes, ma'am.
What kind of services do you offer?
Pre-production, full production, engineering as well, all that stuff. Like I've had people ask, do you ever rent your studio? And I'm like, not really. This is my rocket ship, I mean, if somebody wanted to come in and use it that I knew, I'd be down with that. But we do everything from full production we do mixing and mastering as well. I'm actually mixing a Decipher Down song right now.
Ooh, I can't wait to hear that.
Literally, Cindy, I finished the master 20 minutes before I called you. When it comes to producing and mixing and all that, is that I want the person to literally feel every single thing that went into the record. That's how it went in, and that's how they're going to get it when it comes out. My thing is like, if somebody's got a voice like TJ, you got to showcase it, so you always hope to work with guys as talented as that. And obviously, we go way back. We've got a great friendship. We've been friends for years.
Brantley Gilbert, tell us what you're doing with Brantley.
Yes, ma'am. So I play guitar with Brantley. Started with him in 2014. It's crazy because riffy country music. And I mean, coming to a Brantley Gilbert show is like coming to a big crazy rock show. Depending on what tour it is, we could have fire everywhere and pure insanity, So yeah, it's crazy, man. Got the gig similar to how I got the gig with Pillar. Only with this, they were like looking for a rock guitar player. They had actually reached out to Lester because one of the guys in Brantley's band was friends with Lester. And he was like, hey, man, do you know any rock guitar players? We're heavily looking because our guitar player just quit and we need to replace him within like a week. I woke up to a text from Lester asking if I wanted to try out for Brantley Gilbert, which at the time I was like, who's Brantley Gilbert and what kind of music is it? He was like, it's country. And I was like, I don't know, man. And I'm like wiping my eyes and I'm like, huh. And Lindsay's like, what is it? I was like, I just got this text from Lester asking if I wanted to try out for Brantley Gilbert. And she's like, shut up. I'm like, is he a big deal? She's like, he's freaking huge and he's amazing. He's like hard rock country. And I was like, oh, I like the sound of that. So she's like, seriously, check this out. And then she went to YouTube and pulls up a song of his called Kick It in the Sticks, which kind of feels like a Pillar riff. And it's like, I was like, man, that feels like a riff that I would play, Well, it turns out that the guitar player that left, that I had replaced, was a huge Pillar fan. And they would actually play Pillar songs during their rock jam. And we still, to this day, with Brantley, we do rock jams in the middle of the set. So it was just crazy that he was like a Pillar fan. And so when I joined the band, Ben, our drummer for Brantley, is also, he listened to Pillar too. He listened to like Red and Disciple and Pillar and stuff. He's like, that's crazy, man. And I was like, dude, this is crazy how the Lord works, But it was literally like I just jumped out of one spaceship into another. A very similar vibe,
Check us out on Facebook at I'm with Mothership.
Everyone's waiting for this question. Is there any chance of a one-off or a tour with Pillar?
When you say a one-off, you're talking about a show or are you talking about music?
One-off show. One-off music, I know y'all can handle that. You've done that with our Christmas songs and stuff. But I'm talking about somebody getting to see you guys live?
I don't know. I have come to the conclusion that if we talk about it, I'm totally down for it. You know, there was a time you didn't want to rip off the Band-Aid again and then have to put it back on, you know? Because, I mean, like, dude, that was 10 years of my life. And for Rob and Mike, it was like 13 years of their lives, you know? That being said, you know, we've never really broken up, right? So
Exactly. You still do occasional songs, so hey.
Yeah. So I'll say this. It's possible. It's possible. This year, if you look back on Pillar history, is the same year a certain album came out 20 years ago. So there could be some things in the works. That's all I'll say about that.
Interesting. What else do we need to talk about?
I'm going to be releasing some of my own stuff soon.
Oh.
And I haven't chose the name yet. I literally have thousands of songs just sitting in folders, you know. I'm releasing some metal stuff. It's like for all those people that always thought Pillar should be heavier, well, that's where they're going to get.
I'm getting a little excited right now. Is this the first time you've shared this news?
It hasn't been out yet, so we're plotting and planning for the release. I'm going to get some more songs finished. Got tons and tons of riffs already in Pro Tools and worked out and songs written. I just got to complete vocals and stuff, you know. Don't get me wrong, with Brantley, I play in a band, but I'm playing somebody else's songs, which is cool. And I love it, you know, because I still get to perform on a big stage and, you know, Brantley songs are freaking awesome. But at the same time, you know, you miss that writing with guys. So since I don't have a band to write with, I'm having to be my own band, which is cool, you know, but yeah, it's going to be totally solo. Who knows? Maybe I'll have some guests on there, you know, that'd be dope, you know, to see what happens.
Well, this is exciting news. You heard it here first.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, maybe I'll send it to you.
Maybe you will.
Maybe I will.
Better.
Maybe be the inside scoop.
Awesome.
You know, I do so many different styles of music. It's like I've got pop, I've got Americana, I've got folky stuff, I've got bluesy stuff, I've got country stuff. So at some point, I'll probably just be releasing a bunch of different types of things under just, you know, Dread Rock, either that or Noah Henson projects, you know, kind of thing.
Great stories. And I kept you way too long. So,
No, I think it's the other way around, Cindy. I kept you way too long.
No. I would love to hear more. We'll have to do it again.
We'll have to do another segment, man.
Yeah, we will have to. But anyway, it's great to get to know you a little bit better. And anyway,
Yeah.
but I am super stoked about your stuff coming out.
Oh, thank you.
I'm
so
all
much.
about metal.
You know, I've always been a singer, but I just fell into being a guitar player more than anything. So,
Well,
but,
it's time to shine.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I hope to see you out there on the road with somebody.
Sounds great. Thanks for
All
having
right.
me.
Thank you. Good night.
Rock on, Mothership.
Good night.
All right, bye.
Thank you for listening tonight. Stay tuned for more great music all night long. Be sure to check out my I'm with Mothership Facebook page and Solid Rock Radio's website. Follow the link under shows to Backstage with Mothership, which will have the links to my guests' social media accounts. This show will be replayed at 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Past interviews available on podcast.solidrockradio.org, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on Pandora platforms. And remember this week, be kind to one another.